everybody. On behalf of the Melbourne Entrepreneurial Centre, I want to give you a warm welcome to Melbourne Connect Innovation Week and a big thank you to major partner Telstra for their involvement in the festival. Thanks for coming to today's MEC Masterclass on PR and marketing. I hope you're excited and ready to learn. I'm Sarah and I'm the Marketing, Communications and Events Manager at MEC. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of country where Melbourne Connect is situated, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and recognise and thank them for their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. I pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders here today. So a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. Toilets can be found to my left through the rear of the kitchen. And in the event of an emergency, please exit via the sliding doors over this way. You'll be guided by a warden to an evacuation point. So I'm joined here today by three wonderful guests who are all experienced marketers and communicators and are also ardent supporters of the startup ecosystem and seeing early stage startups succeed. We're very lucky to have with us Sarah Green, partner at Character and Distinction and co-founder of Protagonist Capital. Mark Harland, COO at Atomos. We're also very lucky that Sarah and Mark are MAP mentors this year. And Sam Henderson, Head of Marketing at Skalata Ventures. I'm just very glad that they're all sitting in the order I had them on my script, to be honest. So would each of you like to give us a little intro and a career snapshot? We'll start with you, Sarah.
Oh, goodness. Sarah Green. Career snapshot. I started in PR at the ripe old age of 19 and after working in agencies for a bit ended up at Telstra. So loved being there for 6 years in Sydney and Melbourne, working on their product PR. Left Telstra, started Character and Distinction with Kate Dinnon. At Character and Distinction, we look after clients like Culturamp, July Luggage, MYOB, Deliveroo, lots of others that I'm forgetting under the pressure. And we, are really, really passionate about telling good stories, telling good founder stories, and helping brands do PR that is actually meaningful and that is actually going to move the needle for their business. So hopefully that's what we'll talk about today.
Thank you. Yeah, this is the easy question, right? So Mark Harland, I originally from Montreal, and then I did my master's in the US in marketing and finance, then joined with General Motors and did the world tour. So I took on all the fun, some glamorous, not so glamorous in Europe, Asia. Came down to Australia after a stint in Singapore to help save Holden, and I failed. But that was already happening before me, of course. But loved it here, so decided instead of taking the trip back to Detroit, we decided to settle the family in Melbourne because we loved it. I went on to work with AGL and launched in-house at AGL kind of a startup. It's kind of a startup in a well-funded company, so we launched an EV subscription program before anyone was really talking about EVs, or we had supply of EVs, so which is still going on. More recently been the COO of Atomos, and have Bob and Chris here who are actually filming us today, so do video monitor recorders and capturing a lot of stuff. They had a good chat yesterday, and so it's a different way of capturing the storytellers.
Amazing. I don't have that background, but I'll give you a little spiel. Sam Henderson, I'm currently Head of Marketing Comms at Skalata Ventures, which is an early stage venture capital firm based in Melbourne. We've been going for about 4 years now. We've got a portfolio of over 40 companies across Australia. And our model is that we invest a small bit of capital up front in a company. They come through our venture development program for 5 to 6 months. We kind of nurture them, we help them grow, we help them get a growth engine humming, and then we can invest follow-on capital following that 5 or 6 months and kind of help them on their journey as they progress through to Series A. Prior to Skalata, I worked in the startup world. I worked in an equity crowdfunding startup with a kind of crypto swing to it, and we were responsible for the first crypto-funded IPO in Australia last year, before last, which is a really interesting space to be in. Prior to that, I worked in more traditional B2B finance with some B2C elements around kind of term deposits and things like that. So I've kind of seen the financial spectrum from a B2C perspective and a B2B perspective. And then prior to that, I worked in Wi-Fi infrastructure, marketing, ICT managed services. So I've kind of seen the whole spectrum from tech to finance to fintech through to venture capital. So hopefully that experience is valuable and provides some good insight today.
Well, we're very lucky to have all three of you here today. Like Sarah, I started off working at a PR agency at the ripe old age of 18, although it was a wine marketing agency, so at 18, it's probably the best job in the world. So I made the jump in-house to the university where I've been for the last 4 years, but I guess the thing about marketing is it is a really broad church and it's constantly evolving and growing, and your journey of learning never really stops. So I'm really excited to learn from you three today, and I'm sure everyone in the audience is as well. We'll get stuck into some questions from me, and we'll leave roughly 15 to 20 minutes at the end to have some questions from the audience. And I do know that there are some MAP teams and some TRAN teams in the audience, and they will have some excellent questions for you prepared, I'm sure. So we'll kick off. Mark, we've just talked about marketing being a really broad church, and we've all got very different, I guess, sorts of experiences within that world. How do you sort of define the difference between PR, marketing, comms, and how do they kind of play with each other?
Yeah, it's a good question, because a lot of times all of us say kind of marketing, and it's this catch-all that I'm going to do some marketing, and that incorporates the communications, the PR, it could be an Instagram campaign. It incorporates a whole lot, including training and videos that you put on YouTube, so it kind of, you put that all under there. What I often see, and by the way, this is not unique, Sarah, and I think the other guys would agree, to startups, but I also see it in large corporates, is you need to start with the market. So to me, marketing is the plan, it's the strategy, it's the starting point. So what is the overall strategy? Who is your consumer? How much are you going to spend on attracting people to the brand versus conversion on sales? And then further defining on the communications channel. So what kind of communications, what's the tone of voice you're going to use in your communications, the difference between marketing communications and PR, by the way. So even in Atomos, we have one PR firm that strictly handles trade media, so talking to people that are buying cameras and recorders and things like that. And we have another PR agency that strictly talks to the people that are reading articles about us in the ASX, so talking to the investors. So when you're talking to the investors, there's a different tone of voice and a different strategy versus talking to trade media. And that's different. Those two communication pieces are then again, that's different from talking to your customers and your prospective customers. So to me, marketing, you start with the marketing strategy, really well defining then the channels you're going to use, the customers you're going to talk to, and of course, the budget. Because a lot of even corporates just kind of throw a bunch of money and say, that's all for marketing. And then at the end of the year, they go, why'd you overspend your budget here in marketing? And because it wasn't really well defined at the start, at the outset. So.
Excellent. And I guess we've started off talking about strategies, and in my experience, and even now at MEC, I find that beginning stage of starting to develop a strategy can be the most challenging and getting the ball rolling. Sarah, where do you start?
Well, yeah, like we've sort of been talking about with strategy, when I guess you're coming from a PR point of view, and we've talked about this before when we were doing calls to get ready for this session, customer/audience is key. So if we want to know as much information as possible about who are you trying to reach, where are they, what outlets are they reading, or are they not reading outlets, are they on Instagram, all of that information will then set up best how you can use the channels available to you. And I guess from a PR point of view, lots of people want the sexy kind of, final story to show family and friends and feel validated and stuff. But, one of the stories that I always wheel out when starting conversations with people about this is we were working with a startup who we were getting stories for them in Smart Company, in the AFR, that kind of stuff. The stories that moved the needle for them were in Lawyers Weekly and Accountants Daily. They are a cybersecurity tech company. So I think that understanding where your audience is, who are the people that are going to, if you're wanting to buy your product, or who are the people that are going to invest in your company, if that's what you want to do, where they are, what they're reading, is really valuable.
Excellent. And Sam, you're a big audience fanboy. You've just got to go to Sam's LinkedIn and he talks about audiences a lot. Why do you... I've dobbed you in. You are a really big fan of understanding your audiences inside and out. Why do you think that's so important?
Because no one really does it. It's just not a done thing. You'd think it's meat and potatoes. It's the simple thing for marketers to do, but people just don't do it. There's this obviously split between quantitative and qualitative data. And we're so reliant as marketers on looking at a Google Analytics dashboard and seeing, hey, this is our traffic, these are our conversions, this is our funnel, this is what's happening. But it doesn't tell you the full picture. And you go into startups, you go into large established companies, and people still don't have a conversation with their customers because it's hard. It's hard to schedule. It's hard to prepare interview questions. It's hard to digest those insights. You can't put it in a spreadsheet. And people just don't put the effort into actually doing it and actually having those conversations. So that's absolutely the first step. It's just to sit down and have those conversations. It's become especially pertinent now that, first party data is becoming really important. The likes of Apple are, clamping down on privacy, whether it's a good thing, whether it's a cynical thing, they're launching their own ad platform, that's a different conversation. But that kind of big quantitative data is becoming less and less valuable. Thick or qualitative data is much more important, and people need to sit down and kind of have the conversations with their customers. Because, customers change. I came into Skalata a year and a half ago, and day one I was like, hey, cool, where are your audience personas? You have some interview recordings, great, I'll digest all of that, and that's fine. But looking back at that now, compared to where we are now, looking back at that versus where we are now, it's completely changed. The customers have changed, the funding climate has changed, founders' needs have changed, and it's constantly evolving. Unless you have your ear to the ground and having those conversations on a daily basis, you're going to get absolutely left behind.
Just to pick up on that, so even when you know your audience, so we've at Atomos had the same audience, the professional storytellers, videographers for years and years, and then we said, we want to grow in a new area. Right? So we've been doing this for years, talking to the same people. We kind of know where they are. You've got to keep, adjusting to Sam's point. We said a big target audience, believe it or not, for us, which is massive in the US, is houses of worship. All kinds, doesn't matter the denomination, but houses of worship, especially during COVID, doing broadcast videos of services online was a huge opportunity. And we all looked around and said, well, who knows anyone, in houses of worship that's doing? So we had to go and start almost at square one, having the conversation, seek out the subject matter experts across different denominations. How are you using the equipment? How can we help? Where could we support your workflow? What are the magazines or the different websites that your churchgoers would be visiting? So it was complete relearning for us of a new audience, despite doing this for years and years.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess, Sarah, you've also got the other lens that you can come at this in terms of understanding audiences from an investor perspective. What are the other benefits of doing all of that upfront, really hard work in understanding your audience, and how does that set you up for success with an investor?
Well, I think, as was just mentioned about the idea that the funding landscape has changed, in conversations that are happening now, there's lots of talk about, a little bit around who your customer is, or if you're really early stage, like we look at, it's, have you built a community? Who's your community? What are you seeing there? And that's where we're finding if it's not, a big company or a startup to a scale up, that's the type of data that investors are looking for in order to feel confidence in investing. So spending that time with your customers, understanding like this is what the next 12 months, 18 months looks like for us. We know because we asked our customers 2 months ago, and they said they want us to develop out this part of the product or that part of the product. So we're looking for funding from you to do that. That is invaluable stuff that, gives investors confidence. And, you know, also part, as you're saying, like part of that stuff of like, and going back again and being like, and we're going to talk to our customers again in 3 months' time and check that that's still right. And we're going to always be testing and, you know, evolving as we go.
And I think we see a lot at Skalata, you know, startups are constantly iterating and trying to achieve that product market fit. But sometimes they're doing so in absolute isolation and they're not talking to their customers, and that's the absolute downfall of most startups, is they just don't have those conversations. And yeah, it's super important.
Excellent, and I think it sort of comes back to Mark's point before as well. It gives you those opportunities to explore new markets and pivot, and I think over the last couple of years we've all seen how valuable it is to have those skills to be able to evolve into new markets along the way. So we talked a little bit about channels as well, and I know that, you know, I guess when you're starting out it can be really enticing to jump on every potential channel that there is available to you. Mark, how do you go about identifying which channels are right?
Yeah, good question. And again, so assuming you know who your audience is and you've done your homework and you agree, and you have a defined budget, by the way, so assuming this, which is not, by the way, a given at all at any company. So assuming you know that, then it's really defining on the channel that you want to have that communication. So I always look at, I know this will sound really simplistic, but I was like, Google 101, right? Search, you know? Okay, so we're going to allocate a certain amount of money to Google and doing the basic search, making sure, of course, that our pages are optimized for that, and doing some paid, and seeing what our competitors are doing as well. And then depends what we want to do. So if we're educating or storytelling, you know, go to YouTube, or it could be Instagram stories, right? If we're having a conversation around, it could be just a new product or a little news piece that we want to do, you know, Twitter's there, you know, but that's limited in terms of what you can do. Of course, TikTok has exploded, but again, it's another expensive platform. So a lot of people go, I want to go all in on TikTok and I want to go all in on Instagram stories, and I love both those platforms, by the way, and video, of course, not just because we're in a video company, but it has to be video for the most part. But those are also really expensive platforms and don't always reach your target audience, or you don't always know if they're reaching your target audience. So you really got to be careful on, here's the target audience, here's the channel, here's the budget, I'm going to subscribe to that channel, because you can blow a lot of money in a couple of those channels. You can blow a year's worth of budget in a month if you're not careful.
Definitely. Sam, how many channels is too many?
Depends. At a start stage, just going on with what was mentioned there, I think there's a model you can actually look at, in which what we go through with our startups, it's kind of the ICE model. It's, you know, you put on a page every single possible channel that your customers can be active on. You know, that's the I. Identify those channels. C is kind of look at the confidence that you can generate traffic, you can generate leads on those channels. And then E is what's the actual ease of use of setting up those channels. You know, for example, scaling up a Facebook campaign, you know, spinning that up in a day is possible. You know, a robust content strategy is going to take months and months and months to see come to fruition. Same as SEO, same as a proper PR strategy. So it's actually looking at those, each option, and seeing the ease of use, the confidence you can make them happen, and then kind of iterating and trying different things and experimentation, especially early on. You're not going to know what your channel is until you experiment. Most of our startups are totally reliant on one channel. And that's, you know, you'd be like, oh shit, that's a dangerous thing to be reliant. But I'd see 90% of startups be reliant on one channel. But you don't get to that channel unless you experiment early on. And that's the important thing. Obviously, there's a caveat that, you know, don't pump all your money into TikTok ads, don't pump all your money into Facebook ads, because, you know, Zuckerberg can wake up one morning and change the algorithm and you're screwed. But 90% of startups, they are heavily reliant on that one channel or those two channels. If you think SEO is going to be something that is going to help you be successful in the future, obviously that's something you have to get started on sooner rather than later. Same goes for PR and things like that. But early on is just focusing on those one or two channels. Not even at startups, even at established companies. You just don't have time. You have a marketing team of, you know, 5, 10 people at a medium company, and you still don't have time to be active. You know, the marketing spectrum is so massive that you're not going to be giving those channels the attention they deserve. So choose one, choose two, experiment, iterate, and then, yeah, see results from there.
Yeah, it's much easier to pick a couple that you can sort of sit on and maintain, rather than figuring out that you've signed up for far too many and then figuring out how you're going to get rid of those channels. We've talked a bit about budgets, and I'm going through this at the moment, actually, is sitting down and looking at budget and going, how do we spend the money that we've allocated? You know, how much is too much when you have a quote come through from a supplier? So, Mark, you've worked with some really big budgets in your career, particularly at General Motors. There are so many different things that you can direct your resources at, but as an early stage startup, where do you think is the best use of money?
This is going to sound really old school, so you guys will probably correct me and jump on this one. But and coming out of COVID, this will sound funny, but for me, I love old school face-to-face. You know, take a product to a trade show, take a product or a service, get out into the mall where it's high traffic, where you know there could be customers. You know, even I've done it once. Actually, when AGL, when we were doing the EV launch, I worked with the city of Melbourne. I got a permit for like I think $50 to park it. A car right on the Yarra where everyone was coming in and out of work every day, and chatted to a lot of people. A lot of people were like, get out of the way, you're annoying us. But so I love that kind of face-to-face, old school kind of guerrilla marketing, and so allocating a little bit of budget to that to me is always a key part. And then education. We all assume, as users of a product or service, we assume that the rest of the world will instantly know how to use that product or service. And we forget that it's the first time for a lot of people. So assuming that people know where to find you, I think having a series of, whether it be podcasts, YouTube videos, or just educating people how your product, how your service works. And when you think it's really simple, make it even simpler, right? If you go, oh, this is like the dummy's guide to using the product, then make it even simpler, because a lot of times what you know in your brain is not coming out in the video or in the communications. And if people don't understand how your product or service works for them or helps improve their life or adds value, then they're just going to ignore it.
From your opinion, Sarah, where should startups be spending their money?
Well,
PR.
no, not
Character
necessarily.
and distinction.
But I like what you were saying about YouTube videos and that kind of stuff from a different idea, actually. I think that at the start, when you've got limited resource, you should be spending your money on how to tell your brand story really well and making your brand story pop. Any of the big companies that have had huge success, Heaps Normal, July Luggage, one of our clients, or actually now two of our clients I've just mentioned. Anyway, those companies, part of what is awesome about them is not just their product, it's their brand story. And so when you're doing the YouTube videos and the podcasts and however you choose to do your education, also think of that as part of you educating yourself on what resonates with people, what doesn't resonate with people. Show it to your family and friends. Get your mum to say, I don't get that. Like, can you explain it again? Get people to say, marketing tile looks really sexy, that video looks really sexy, that looks daggy, that kind of stuff. Because then, when you get to me, I say, that's great. Or I say, we need to spend a bit of time working on your brand storytelling. So if you think about it then as well, it's actually a really good way to sort of kill two birds with one stone, and it will reap the benefits for you later on. And also it'll reap the benefits for you when you're talking to investors. You know, it's the same thing that you're going to need. It's the same thing you're going to need when you're talking to journalists as you're going to need for investors, as you're going to need for...
That's your elevator pitch, right?
That's your elevator pitch, yeah.
I think it's about speaking from a startup perspective, it's about that flexibility of budget too, and not kind of, you know, it's start a financial year, this is our set budget, we must spend X amount on content, we must spend X amount on SEO, you know. Always iterate, always test those channels, always reallocate budget to things that are working better than others, and don't fall into the trap of going, shit, it's in the financial year, I've got to spend X amount more on this, where it's not viable and it's not going to work for you. So I think it's being flexible about that budget as well is really, really important.
For sure, and I think from my perspective, having worked with lots of clients who work in the tech space and also lots of early stage startups, it's really important that your elevator pitch passes the pub test. So if you're talking to somebody who is very intelligent but doesn't have the same background as you, you need to be able to explain to them over a drink at the pub, or if you're meeting them at the party or in line for a coffee, what you do in 30 seconds, and they need to understand it. They need to walk away and go, I understand what that particular business does, whereas there are so many times that people explain their elevator pitch and the language is so elevated, let's use a buzzword, that you sort of, they walk away and you go, oh, I've genuinely got no idea what they're, like they seem like they're really switched on, but I've got no idea what their business does. And that's what you want to avoid, particularly if you're starting to have conversations with media, because there's so many times I've been hung up on a journalist on the phone because my pitch about a company that I'm talking about is so elevated that they don't understand and they don't have the time. So I guess we'll open up to some questions from the audience in a sec, but I kind of wanted to finish off the questions that I've got prepared around media, because lots of startups and lots of people in the room are going to be like, you know, I want my article in the AFR or the Australian. It's like, shout out to Yolanda and Swanee, they do a great job, but, you know, they only run so many stories a week and there are only so many startups that they're keen to cover. We'll start with Sarah. What do you need to have prepared before you start having those conversations? Because the sexy articles are great, but they're really hard to get.
Yes, they are. Well, I would say you need a really good elevator pitch. You need really good headshots, really good. So what else is going to be in your pitch? Or when Swanee or Yolanda says, yeah, I'd love to chat, can you send through those photos? Can you send through a bit about your company? All of those things that they're going to need. And if you can't do one of those pieces of the puzzle, the story stops. It's not like, oh no, but I could take an iPhone photo now. They'll be like, I cannot put that in print. The story stops. So those pieces of the puzzle are really important. The other thing that I would say is this type of stuff is really good, and what you're doing now in terms of networking is really important. So the two people who you just used, Swanee and Yolanda, they have their ears to the ground. They know exactly what's going on in the startup scene in Melbourne. So by the time you pitch to them, they have probably heard of you if you have been networking, you've been talking to other people, you've been, you know, connecting to the broader network. And that's really important. Like, word of mouth is, you know, hugely impactful as a marketing tool. It's also hugely impactful in media. So I think that's very, very important.
Yeah, and I would echo that. I mean, it's sometimes it feels like hard yards, but building relationships, right? Building relationships, and then you need to think about, you know, and I know a couple of companies that I've already talked to in the MAP program have ambitions to go overseas. So do you want to be an Australian-only company and talk to just people in Australia, or do you want to sell your product in China or America or in Europe? And what is the brand pitch? What's the elevator pitch? You know, in Australia is not necessarily going to work. In America, definitely can tell you, having lived in these different places, it's not going to work in Korea or China. You're going to have to make those adjustments for the local market. So you need to think of that too. So if you are going to have aspirations to be an international company, you need to think about that. But I think, to your point, Sarah, it's building those relationships, and whether it's on a Zoom call or it's phone or going out to the pub or having a lot of coffees, and sometimes it feels like, how many more coffees can I have in a day? Certainly in Melbourne, I drink a lot of coffee, and I've become a Melbourne coffee snob too, by the way. But those go a long way. But make sure when you're having those relationships and those catch-ups with people that you have your product or your service. And so you know, if there's a product going to be released and you have a beta version, get it out to those people that are those influential people, whether it be in media or potential partners. Get those beta products out in their hands so they're using it, they're testing it, and they can talk when they do their podcast or YouTube video or their article in the AFR. They can talk firsthand about your product or your service, and it's not just regurgitated stuff from your press release, which is rubbish reporting anyway.
Oh, exactly. I'll give you an example.
Press releases are rather great.
We finished an investment on a company yesterday, and I got an email about 2 hours after the cash had been delivered to the bank account saying, all right, cool, we need to work on PR now, I want to get in the AFR next week, and it echoes what you guys are saying, and it's a common trend. Every single company we invest in wants that. Whereas you said, you know, the most effective media, doesn't come from, you know, company raised X million dollars, because journalists don't care about that anymore. The fundraising climate over the last few years, everybody's raised X million dollars. That's not news anymore. It's not a story. And especially as a C-stage investor, no one cares that you raised less than $1 million. They don't care about that at all. So it's finding the angle. It's finding those kind of trade publications, like you said, Lawyers Weekly. Who's actually in your industry? Where are your customers? You know, you don't have to appeal to your own ego, your own self-validation via, you know, the likes of AFR, or you come down to kind of Smart Company, or, you know, like Startup Daily. There's definitely a tiered system in the startup landscape. But yeah, you don't have to be there. You have to be where your customers are, and I think that's really important. And that gets lost in the sea of ego sometimes, that you want to see your name imprint in kind of the top tier.
Absolutely, and I think when it comes to customers as well, I'm sure you probably all find the same thing, that having some really fantastic case studies, like actually understanding who are your, not necessarily your VIP customers, and in some cases it can be, but who are kind of your lieutenants? Who can you send into battle for, you know, to have an interview with a journalist, who are going to stand up and go, you know, I have used this particular product and it has, you know, it's completely changed the way that we do business, or, you know, it's completely changed my life, or whatever it might be. But having those kind of people that you can roll out for media interviews and having them backed up, like if we're talking war stories, my Facebook memories come up and I have things popping up like, does anyone have, you know, kids under the age of 10 that, you know, might be interested in doing a Baker's Delight shoot tomorrow? You'll get to take home free bread. And it's like, oh, cringe. But everyone that's worked in PR or marketing at some stage has had to go and find some of those case studies. So I think it's really valuable as you're starting to have clients that, you know, are coming back and saying, hey, we really love what you're doing, to hit them up and go, would you like to be a case study? Even having them as testimonials on your website is better than nothing.
We're working with a fintech at the moment, and we're basically focused the back half of this year as they put their product in beta and launch, and then launch into each state. All we are doing is brand storytelling for them within their team, making sure their executives are ready, making sure we have good case studies, making sure we have good key messages. They're media trained and they've got good photos for us to properly start a PR campaign next year.
And one thing, and I know I want to get to audience questions too, but make sure you know how to differentiate yourself from your competition too. So this is also another area, because at some point it's inevitable to say, someone will say, well, how are you different than them? Well, it's a different service or a different product. Or it's a similar service in the same ecosystem, but ours delivers this versus theirs delivers that. So know your competition inside and out, because likely if you're talking to someone who's in the industry or someone who's good in the media world, they'll know who your competition is, and they're going to ask you at some point. And if you're not prepared, they're like, oh, that's, you know, they're different, or we're a little bit different because we have a different colored logo, then you get lost.
Same goes for, oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, a good way to do that we do is we'll take out our client's name and put in their competitor. And if the same exact sentence can be said, it's not a differentiator and it's not interesting enough.
It's a great tip, really great tip.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think the same goes for actually pitching your startup as well. There's a lot of startups who, you know, the elephant in the room is your competition. It is that competitive landscape. And there's some startups who kind of, you know, try to brush on the rug and say, you know, we're doing better than them. But the ones that actually stand up and fully acknowledge the good things their competitors are doing, you know, they're the ones that win because they know their market and they know how to beat them. And that's akin to what you were saying.
Excellent. I think hopefully no one in this room has too much to deal with like issues and crisis, but we used to do a lot of issues preparedness with clients, and what we used to do was sit down and go, I want you to write a list of all of the questions that you do not want somebody to ask you, whether that's, you know, when you're actually pitching for investment or whether that's a journalist, but sit down and think about the things that you don't want to answer, figure out how to answer them, and once you've got those answers, you're basically going to be prepared for anything that gets thrown at you because you've thought through all of those eventualities. So we might open up to some questions from the audience. Lovely Abby from my team is going to be a microphone runner. Does anyone have any burning questions that they'd like to kick off with? Yes.
Hi, I'm Melody. I've just recently started a clothing label with a business partner to my left, Kylie.
Congratulations.
Thanks. We did a soft launch about a week ago, which went really well. And I just wanted to get an idea of a business like a small brand clothing label. What percentage of our annual budget should be spent on PR and marketing? Percentage.
Percentage of total revenue?
Yeah, percentage of our output.
Yes, yeah. To me, I look at it in a couple of different ways. Is you start to allocate, sales and marketing, and then you have sales promotional dollars. So I don't know if you're going to do any, that's discounting. So sales promotions would be at some point in the next 12 months, are you going to offer a financial year-end sale and stuff like that? So I put those two together, and then I go, all right, well, how much does that come? In a large automotive, you're talking, as a percentage of revenue, it's like 2 or 3%. At a smaller company, it could be upwards of 15%, thereabouts. So it really, of revenue, right? So it really depends on, and again, are you going to travel to trade shows and do demonstrations, or is it going to be on media? So it really depends on a lot of those things. We're not giving you a simple answer, are we? Because it's
No. I was thinking more so, like I've met with several PR companies over the past couple of years researching, and I was pretty floored about the charges that they expected, like looking in the $10,000 to $15,000 kind of ballpark. Is that reasonable?
Do you want to answer that one?
Yes. You pay peanuts, you get monkeys.
Yep.
The reality is we get so many people who come to us that say, I spent $5,000 a retainer on an agency for the last year or two and I've seen nothing.
Yep.
And it's like, yeah.
Yep.
Who did you use? And you're like, oh, yeah, cool. So, but like the flip side to that is I'm not sure that PR would be the right, as in you're using, I would hope you're sort of a bit more focused on stuff like Instagram and TikTok and those kinds of things versus traditional PR. My first thought was you need amazing content, you need beautiful photos, you need, like when we don't do fashion, we do we work with lots of lifestyle companies like Adore Beauty and July and stuff.
Yes.
And again, when you think of companies like that, on their own Instagram, their content is stunning.
Yep.
So I think that spending the time in that would be my space. I mean, if you take it, we can talk later, but like a company like July, 2 or 3 years ago, we started working with them, and it was really they were like, we want to be in Vogue, and we were like,
So do we.
Now, so it's been 4 years for them, and what needed to happen was they needed success.
Yep.
Vogue does, you can sometimes get Vogue to be like, these guys I found, and they're amazing, but most of the time they get success, and then Vogue is like, these guys are amazing, and it's the tipping point. Vogue's just the tipping point.
Yep.
Now we get Vogue calling us, and we're like, oh, sure, yeah, what do you want to do with July? Oh, I think we can fit it in. Not really. We're always like, thank you, Vogue. But it's like 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when they were saying the same thing to us, and we were like, there's a long process to get there.
Yeah.
But you'll get there.
Yeah.
But like a key piece of the puzzle for them was incredible content.
Yeah.
You look at every single one of their photo shoots, they are amazing.
Okay.
And someone who employs different agencies to do different things. So this is the COO talking now. Is as soon as I got that $15,000, let's say proposal, I'd say I would want to break down, line item breakdown, and you probably hate this, but how much is going to the actual media, how much is content development, how much is going to agency fees, and
Yes.
a bunch of useless people that I never talk to, right? So there's all,
Yeah.
how many account handlers are there that I have to pay for
Yeah.
that actually aren't, so I wouldn't be afraid to challenge them to say, okay, I'm comfortable spending X amount on media, X amount on content, and I want one single interface. So challenge them, but yeah, at some point, if you want a good reputable agency, you're gonna have to pay for it.
Yeah.
And I think
Personally, I don't think you would be doing PR yet. Would be my, yeah.
Yeah, I think a common thing we see is people like to isolate an organic strategy and a paid strategy, whereas in reality you should be using your organic strategy to inform your paid strategy. You should be using an organic social media strategy with a business like yours, of course, seeing what performs best, putting that effort into content. Obviously, your budget is split into paid media budget, but it's also your own time being put into that content.
Yep.
So see what performs, amplify what performs via your channels, your TikToks, your Instagrams, etc. But don't treat those as two separate things, because that's where most people go wrong. So use organic to inform paid.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm Kirsty. I'm the Creative Director for Furnish, and Furnish is part of the MAP program currently. So we're wrapped to be part of that. My question was sort of directed to you, Sarah, around brand storytelling, and you touched on it briefly, and you touched on sort of the importance of an elevator pitch, but I'd love to, and I'm sure everyone in the room would love to hear an example of an excellent brand story from one of your clients that you've worked with. It might be July, it might be someone else, I'm not sure, but how have they gone about really telling a story that resonates with their audience?
That resonates, sure. Well, the first thing I would say is, and I'm doing a presentation for MAP and a presentation for TRAM in the next few weeks. Anyone that comes to that, there's a spoiler alert. So, I'm going to be regurgitating a piece of content, and I apologise profusely. But Simon Sinek has an amazing, idea and video called Start With Why. Look it up on YouTube. It's part of his TED Talk. And he talks about big brands, good brands, talk about their why, not their how or their what. So we always frame it that way. If you take a brand like Heaps Normal as an example, they have a great brand story. So their brand story is 3 guys that would get together all the time for a beer and realised, we're just getting drunk. I don't want to do that. I want to socialise with you, not to have a drink. Now, that's my version of their brand story, but I would assume most people in this room can regurgitate that version of their brand story. It is a why. It's not that they created a non-alcoholic beer. It's like, we were doing this, and then because of that, we created a non-alcoholic beer. So that is the type of stuff we mean when we say brand story. Airbnb has, a big one. They're those stories that end up kind of becoming folklore and that people can say themselves.
Memorable ones, yeah?
Exactly.
But the memorable ones, the Apple and the Tesla or all, that didn't happen overnight, right? So those, to Sam's point, those evolve and continue to evolve. And by the way, for any of you who've ever worked with an Apple or a Tesla or anyone, they are rabid about protecting the brand and not letting it, doing crazy promotions or things that are not in alignment with the why or the DNA of the brand. And they'll stop doing business with partners that don't treat the brand the way they should. So once you've found that DNA of the why and you feel really comfortable with it and you've tested it, make sure you protect it and then you cultivate it.
And it's always evolving. For context, at Skalata Ventures, we're going through brand strategy at the moment. We're working with an external agency. We've just conducted 30 interviews in the last week, and we're kind of combing through that data. So, I think we're doing quite well, but we're as I said, the market has changed, and if you're not catering towards your core audience, which ours is founders, then you need to make a change. And I think it needs to be constantly evolving. You don't need to go and pay a brand agency $50K every year to kind of restate that and re-evolve that. But I think, even as an established company, you need to continue to kind of reinvent and reanalyze what's actually happening.
Speaking of that, as a personal anecdote, obviously I have a brand myself, Character and Distinction, and we have a monthly meeting where it's a culture team meeting, and we start with essentially our own brand story. Do we all still feel comfortable with it? Do we all still feel like that's what we do? Do we all still feel like that's who we're helping? Are we aligned to that? If we're not aligned to it, is it because the business is evolving and our brand story is evolving, or are we not aligned to it because we've spent the month or the last bit of time doing stuff we don't want to do, and we need to correct back onto stuff we want to do that is aligned to our brand?
That's great.
And I think the larger you become, inevitably the more bureaucracy there is, there's the more stakeholders, the more different subsets of people you need to cater to, and that sometimes, dilutes your brand story or creates some conflicts in there, and that's something to always be aware of and always kind of listen to.
How are you doing? Thank you for coming today. This question is for Mark. How would you encourage Australian startups to have the confidence to go global, because you have that background? Because I've seen over the years, Australia has amazing ideas, very switched on people, but not necessarily have the confidence to go to a bigger market.
Yeah, you'd be surprised to know, or maybe you wouldn't be, but a lot of global brands use Australia, especially in Asia or APAC, as a test market to go to Europe or to go to North America, right? So similar, wealth, disposal, demographics, et cetera. For me, it's having, local knowledge on the ground. So even being out of the US market, I've been out of the US market for almost 10 years now. And I went back to a trade show in Vegas, and just the way people are purchasing products, it's like everything they buy in the US right now goes through Amazon Prime. It was like, so the way people are purchasing products in the US has changed dramatically just in the last few years, and it's different, that much different to Australia. So I think my recommendation is if you have that ambition, which I think is great because it just opens up all these other global markets, have a local resource. So whether that be an agency, whether it be someone who went to business school with you, who's now living over there that you contract or something like that, but you really have to have that local knowledge because it's changed. It's changed dramatically. There's no way you or me sitting in Melbourne right now has a pulse on what's happening in New York City. And New York City is really different to what's happening in LA, and that's different from what happens in Dallas, Texas. So local knowledge and trying to find that support.
Yeah, I think it's committing to it as well. We've got 2 startups at the moment. We invested in one in 2018 and one just last year. They're both, in Denver, Colorado at the moment. They've kind of found each other over there. They're kind of sharing the local knowledge with each other. But as you say, I think you've got to be there. You definitely have to be there. You've got to make the sacrifices. I know they've kind of left wives and kids in Australia, and that's awful, and they'll come back and see them. But I think you have to make those sacrifices. You have to go over there. You have to have your ear to the ground of the local economy, because otherwise it's very different. As much as we think Australians and Americans are very similar, we're cousins. The way the markets operate there are vastly different to here, and you need to be there to know that.
Hi, my name is Sunny. So a group of us founded a not-for-profit organisation 2 years ago. So we'd like to see us as a not-for-profit startup because we are very small but we're growing pretty fast. But in terms of PR and marketing strategies, I do want to seek your advice on the number 1 priority for maybe a not-for-profit with a very limited budget in terms of marketing to really get our brand out there, get our services out there for a broader audience.
You want to start, or?
Yeah, I would say, and it's funny, the Spendable guys are here, and I said that as well to them when we were talking. I would say, if you're a non-for-profit, find influencers that care about what you're doing. I think, and they don't have to be massive. I'm not an expert in the influencer space, but from what we see and from the work we do, it's those micro influencers that can be equally as important. But that goes the same for journalists, right? Like if you do a little bit of research, I don't know what your non-for-profit is, but you might find that, there are certain journos who are really passionate about certain areas because they've had real life experience in those issues.
And I think influencer in the sense that, they're not the classic, Instagram influencer or the TikTok influencer. They are, people in industry, CEOs that sit on the boards of non-profits, people like that who could really, get on board with your story and what you're trying to achieve. And obviously the brand story, focus on that, make sure that's down pat before you do any outreach. I think that's really important.
Yeah, the influencer thing could open up a whole nother discussion if we have another
Which
hour
could
here,
work.
so-
Like, you know, they're right. There's such amazing subcultures on TikTok and stuff. But yes, also probably like stakeholders, a stakeholder strategy versus a Instagram bikini shot strategy.
Well, and now we brought it up because it's a hot button for me on influencers, but because back in the day I could give someone a camera or a monitor, and that was enough to get, you know, some mentions on Facebook or TikTok or more likely Instagram back then. Now it's $30,000 plus all the product, plus, you know, paid expenses, plus the trips that they want to take around the world to use the camera and everything. And so and then you really have to sit back and go, all right, is there a return on investment? So if he or she is bringing us 5 million followers, how many of those people will actually be purchasing our product, et cetera? So you really need to start. Some of them you go, yeah, that is worth it. Those 3 million followers really align to our audience, and we can see an incremental lift in sales. In other cases, it's just, oh yeah, Kim Kardashian, that would be really cool. Yeah, sure, puts, you know, and zero lift, zero return on investment on that. But the only comment I'd say on other comment on influence, make sure they're authentic. So we've also gone through in other parts of the world, and this happened in India actually. You know, we hired on a Bollywood actor, and you know, it was literally, he finished the car commercial, and then he was doing the shampoo commercial, and then he was doing the yogurt commercial, and then he was doing, you know, the soccer, and it was like a million. But he walked away driving someone else's brand, and I'm sure he went home and used another brand of shampoo, and I'm sure he wasn't eating that yogurt on a daily basis. So just make sure they're authentic brand ambassadors or influencers.
Yeah, that's why micro-influencers are traditionally considered quite good now. Kim Kardashian and Oprah Winfrey, did everyone see that in the last week? Definitely can move the needle for your brand. But micro-influencers are probably the best place to go.
And if they're on social media, check the followers are real. Elon Musk will tell you that as well.
Thank you.
I was just going to ask, what defines micro-influencer? I have Googled it, but I want to see what you say.
I would say anyone under about 10 to 5K followers.
Hi, I'm Simona and this is Ellie. We're actually here doing a startup for combining art therapy into corporate change as well. Where would you go with that as you are trying to identify to be a little bit different to the competitor, whether they're just your corporate change consultant or an art therapist? How would you go about that?
LinkedIn.
Yes.
Have you looked at LinkedIn?
Yes.
Yeah, so LinkedIn is really valuable. I also think my first thought, obviously with the PR mind, is the work and careers editors of all the major outlets. So unfortunately, the AFR work and careers editor has just left, Tash, but they're hiring someone new. I think that there's an interesting story in again, your why. I assume it's got to do with burnout and got to do with, you know, people needing something more at work and all those types of things. So yeah, good brand story. LinkedIn is super powerful when you've got the right content. But again, I was talking to someone the other day, it's about having really good content. Whatever your channel is, if it's Instagram, it's about that time and energy in you getting awesome photos is actually really valuable. That time and energy in getting a really good post, if you choose LinkedIn, is actually really valuable.
And if you're going to go LinkedIn, because I think it's a great channel too, not cheap either, by the way, depending on what you're doing. But then I would even, and this, you know, you could argue this is right or wrong, but then I would even define it closer around, you know, HR managers, P&C, people that are looking. We love to think that all of our CEOs and founders are caring about the welfare of all of their employees, and they probably do, most of them, not all of them, but most do. They just don't have time to do anything about it. So it's usually up to, if there's an HR or P&C or someone in the organization is probably responsible for employee health and welfare. Also, there are a lot of companies that already, you know, they're using services like employee assistance program, EAP, and things like that. So aligning and getting to know a few of them and saying, hey, would you mind piloting this for us. So reaching out and doing a couple pilots, and then you start to build these case studies that these guys have talked about.
The
as
other
well.
way of coming at it in terms of knowing your audience is thinking about it from within a big corporate, is there one group of people that need it? Is it the marketing team? Is it the in-house legal team? Is it and you could sort of split it that way as another way of okay, well then where are those people?
So all your answers, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like it's more about cold calling and networking, but one-on-one. So does the percentage of your revenue budget shift when you're talking about marketing for this kind of business as opposed to a product, which would be clothes or something like that? Services.
No,
exactly.
same thing with service. It's the same kind of theory applies, if you will. But again, it's just adapting, and as Sam keeps saying, it's keep iterating and fine tuning and figure out what works best. And we could, again, another discussion topic is the way that you do B2B marketing is very different than B2C. And B2B is really it's those inside conversations, and it's really being specific about the people you're talking to and knowing their business and their needs, as opposed to a little broader, B2C where you're trying to attract a larger group. But I think if you started with a very well-defined audience and you managed to get a couple pilots going, I think that starts to open up
Yeah, I think you've got to keep in mind too that, at the early stage, you are the brand is you, they are synonymous, they are one. And if you go down the LinkedIn route, LinkedIn only works on a personal level. It doesn't work on a company level. You have to be saying it. You have to have those opinions. You have to be the one saying those things. Otherwise, it just doesn't function. So keep that in mind. I think that's something we tell all startups. It's kind of early on, the company is you. No matter how much you like it or not, it is you. And that's how you achieve PR coverage. That's how you grow your following on LinkedIn. I mean, we could go on the rabbit hole of building a personal brand without being a dickhead about it, but it is possible on LinkedIn to get that following. I think that's really important. Don't treat it as a company. It's your personal, standing. It's your personal credibility which you need to build as well.
Thank you.
We've got time for one more.
Thank you. Hi, this is Rishti. I've got two questions, one for Mark and one for Sam. So for Mark, as you said, you've been in Australia, US and Australia, of course, and I just want to know, what's the difference you found, in the audience, understanding towards startups, like, in US and in Australia, in the audience? And for Sam, apart from PR and marketing, what do you think, it's best, to uplift your sales? Like, apart from PR and marketing, obviously, this is the PR and marketing. I just want to know, apart from that PR and marketing, what do you think, it will be effective, to uplift your sales? Thank you.
Yeah, it's hard to, it depends on what you're going after, but in general, so what I've seen just in the recent years, that the US is far more advanced in the, call it e-commerce, right? So online transactions, everything from cars to to groceries, to everything through Amazon Prime or eBay, or these kind of channels, which are, if you think about it, Amazon was just establishing itself when I got here, so it's less than, I think, 5 years old, Amazon, and people have been using that. So the online e-commerce and the way people purchase in America, I think, is a couple of years ahead of here. But again, there are regional differences. So you can pretty much, for the most part, lump Sydney and Melbourne together from a demographic. Some of you will probably disagree. I know there are differences, but from a buying behavior point of view, very similar. Whereas, like I said, New York and LA, or Florida versus Michigan are very. So there are some really distinct regional differences in the way and the way people approach the markets in the U.S. as well. So again, it's back to local knowledge.
Can I ask if you're B2B or B2C? B2B? Okay, so I guess outside traditional marketing PR, what we work with a lot of our startups on is establishing really good sales automation processes. And there's a spectrum in sales automation between sending 1,000 cold emails to a list versus actually tailoring them and having the processes in place that automations like adding them on LinkedIn and doing things. There's a very big difference between, hi, insert first name, hope business at insert company name is going well, which we see a lot, versus actually, tailoring that messaging and finding the different subsets. You can still automate a lot, and you can still plan a lot of content and send them to really, honed lists and save your time that way. But we work with our companies to really identify that and see how that'll work for them, because they go in and they think that cold marketing, sales automation, it's scary, it's cold calling, whereas you can achieve so much. Even these days, you've got tools like Clearbit, Apollo, Phantom Buster, all these tools that you can kind of work together to save your time, but still have that kind of personalized approach. And I think that's really important, to keep the personal approach. Even if it's a bullshit personalized approach, which is, in the background, it's not so personalized, you can still kind of fake it till you make it without the, what I said, the insert first name, insert company name, insert. So yeah, sales automation, look into the tools available.
Wonderful. We have run out of time for questions, but I'm sure if our lovely guests are keen to stick around for a tick at the end, you can probably come up and ask any last questions that you've got. It wouldn't be a masterclass without sending everyone here today home without a checklist. So from each of you, what's the one thing that you want everyone here today to go away and do?
Get more data around your audience and customer. If you can, email them and ask them. I was actually talking to my brother the other day, who runs a company as well, and I said to him, he said, my newsletter's not really working, and I said, have you sent an email of the newsletter asking for what people like in the newsletter and what people don't? And he said, no. I said, we'll do that. So
so simple, but no one does it.
Keep on asking the people that are reading your stuff, or your customers, what they want, and develop that.
Yeah, and just to build on that, is where does your product or service, what does it do for them in their life? Where does it add value? Right. So really understanding where your product, your service, and then the other thing I would say is I think someone mentioned it already, is it's not only changing and constantly adapting your strategy and your communications, but it's also having a defined budget. And I know that sounds really crazy, but financial year, defined budget, okay, how's it tracking after a quarter? Because you can blow a lot of money in marketing and communications, and basically, all your profitability. I mean, you can exceed your total top line revenue with marketing if you're not careful. So planning and tracking that budget, I know it sounds really, business school 101, but that's, even the biggest companies don't do a good job at that.
And mine would be kind of, if you're a startup, be a startup, act like a startup, use that to your advantage. You're small, you're agile, you can do things that giant companies can't do, and that's your advantage. There's the innovator's dilemma, which we can go into over here, but you have that advantage to be able to talk to these small subsets of customers, and why not use that? You can do things that don't scale. We actively encourage our startups to do things early on that don't scale. As much as people say, hey, build the processes to this, amazing hockey stick growth scaling engine, early on you have the advantage to do things that don't necessarily scale at all. I mean, we mentioned Airbnb before. I think Airbnb, early on, the founders were going onto Craigslist, the kind of classified website in the US, and looking for people renting out properties. And they were actively going and one-on-one messaging those guys and saying, hey, list your property on our platform. It's better, it has better UX, this is our audience, etc. And that's obviously not scalable, but it's small things like that you can go out and do. I think the founder of Tinder, she would go into colleges in the US and kind of seek out sororities and say, hey, can you please go on this platform? Because once you get the women on the platform, the men will follow. Again, not scalable thing to do, but use your advantage as a startup to get, down and dirty and get and having those conversations, because your ability to be flexible and agile early on will diminish over time, unfortunately. So while you're still young, get out there.
My tip for you all is to make sure that people can understand your elevator pitch, and the people you want to test it on are not people like you. It's people who are not like you who are likely to least understand it. I always say to any of the teams, any of the startup teams that are working on anything that sort of isn't my area, it's like, come test it on me, because it's like elevator pitch for dummies. If I don't understand it, no one's going to understand it. So test it. Grandparents are great. High school age kids are great because, they're intelligent, but they're not necessarily they're not coming at your startup from the same angle that you are. Can you please join me in giving our 3 guests today a very heartfelt one? Thank you. We really appreciate you giving your time to come out today for this masterclass and be a part of Innovation Week. In terms of keeping in touch with us, we encourage you to follow on social media and follow our newsletters. You'll find out all about, we've got 3 excellent end of program events coming up. You'll also find out about program entry for MAP and TRAM as well. So thanks for coming. It's been lovely to have you.